old country where the rivers run wide, folks started asking what they're trying to hide. And behind closed doors and whispered halls, see a few big players thought they'd fool us all. But somebody lit a light in the dark, started connecting every missing mark, and the truth came knocking loud and hard. See, it shook the foundation of that house of cards. It's Beaufort County's house of cards. Pull one thread and it all falls apart, and we're raising the bar, shining a light wherever the secrets are. No more smoke screens, no more facades. The people are watching from near and far, and truth and transparency are our guard. We're tearing down that house of cards. And Facebook Live on a Thursday night, see, bringing the facts and shining the light. No matter who's winning, no matter who's scared, the truth's got a way of hitting hard, and the people deserve to know what's true, what they're spending and who's pulling through. From Bluffton streets to Beaufort yards, the truth keeps shaking that house of cards. It's Beaufort County's house of cards, where the truth cuts through like a shooting star. And Facebook, YouTube, and Big Patriot Radio, taking the story where the people go. Truth and transparency are our regard. No one's too big, no matter who you are, and freedom survives when citizens guard against every house of cards. So tune in every Thursday night, we'll keep shining a light, and truth keeps standing tall as every house of cards can fall.
Gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? The show starts in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Bringing you the best selection of hits for your listening pleasure.
Yeah. So let's get into it.
BigPatriotRadio.com.
Hey, good evening, everybody. It is good to be with you here tonight. Got some rain about ready to come in here. Hopefully the storms will hold off. Man, it's good to see everybody. It's August 27th. I am Mike Covert, your host for tonight, and we're coming to you live from the Big Patriot Radio studios here in the great state of South Carolina. Want to welcome everybody tuning in tonight on YouTube, on Facebook, and those listening around the country and around the world on BigPatriotRadio.com. Thank you so much for joining in. Hey, if you're on Facebook, be sure to like and share tonight's show, as well as like and share the Facebook page. If you're on YouTube, be sure to tag the bell so you're notified of any upcoming videos, as well as please share and have your friends subscribe. It's totally free to the YouTube page. Want to remind everybody that tonight's QR code is sitting right there, right beside me. That is buymeacoffee.com. The sponsor for tonight is you. Folks that support our show by buymeacoffee.com. That's who sponsors the show. It's so awesome to have those folks that do participate and help us out with that. Want to greatly appreciate those folks and recognize them for their support week in and week out. Thank you to those that have done that. Thank you to those that are thinking about, well, maybe tonight I'll just go ahead and click on this little QR code and see what that's all about. Thank you, PB of Bluffton Golf I Play, Yahoozy 12. Thank you for your support, everyone. Felice, thank you. Any Mostar, in Pardo 523, BG of Bluffton. Thank you for all your support. Thank you to Gemini 8224, Fontaine Lynn, and Folly Jen, Bob and Chuck 180, as well as CAD M17. Thank you for your support. Peter Cottontail 26 still with us. Thank you so much. Baggett Spots, Cliff W53, and Jeff and Lisa 624. Wow, thank you all. We appreciate your support and always tuning in to us right here on Beaufort County's House of Cards, Facebook, YouTube, and BigPatriotRadio.com.
You have an incoming transmission.
You are listening worldwide to DJ Magic Night on BigPatriotRadio.com.
Hey, and don't forget, you can also let us know your feelings, your concerns. Hey, you got something you want to ask, you want to talk about, or comment on tonight's show, please do that in the chat room of your Facebook or YouTube, and it'll get buzzed over here, however that works. And we love hearing from our listeners and viewers and so forth. So we're going to change lanes right quick. And, the title of tonight's show was The Showdown in South Carolina. It's the sister versus the doctor. There's been some other takes on that, but we'll keep it straight up and jam up and jelly tight, as some would say, and just call it the sister versus the doctor. Now, the South Carolina U.S. Senate war now expands to its final chapter. If you hadn't heard, South Carolina, we have a result. And make no mistake about it, Darline Graham won the GOP nomination this past Tuesday, August 25th. Darline Graham defeated Congressman Ralph Norman in the Republican runoff for the U.S. Senate nomination here in South Carolina, one of our two senators, winning roughly about 52.5% to 47.6%. That puts Darline Graham on the November ballot, where she is going to face the Democratic nominee, Dr. Annie Andrews. Graham originally up in Pickens or Oconee County, now I believe lives around the Columbia area, and Andrews out of the greater Charleston area. But tonight we're not just going to talk about who won. We're talking about what this election really means. Because it wasn't just simply Darline Graham versus Ralph Norman. There were deeper factors than that. It was a battle over the future direction, if you will, of the Republican Party in South Carolina. Trump won, but so did Darline Graham. Let's start with the obvious. President Donald Trump put his political capital on the line for Darline Graham. He endorsed her. He campaigned with her. His political operation spent significant money helping her campaign, and it worked. Graham won. That tells us something rather important. Donald Trump's endorsement still carries tremendous weight with the Republican voters in South Carolina. Graham didn't, well, that's where it gets interesting, because Graham didn't win by 20 points. She didn't win by 15. She won by about 5 points. And that means nearly half of the Republican voters who participated, which was like 11%, something like that. Nearly half of the Republican voters that participated in the runoff chose Ralph Norman. That's not a landslide. That's nothing but one thing, and that is a warning. The Norman vote, as we're going to call it, isn't going away. Ralph Norman represented something very different. He represented the Republican grassroots voter who wanted a deeply experienced conservative fighter in Washington. He argued that Graham's lack of political and legislative experience was a serious problem. Valid point. His supporters clearly agreed. When Norman conceded late Tuesday night, the reaction from portions of his audience to the mention of Trump was revealing. There is still considerable tension between parts of the Republican Party grassroots and the political establishment surrounding Trump's endorsement decisions. So the question for Darline Graham is not, can she win the Republican nomination? She already did. The question now is, can she unite the Republicans who didn't vote for her? Because she is going to need them, unequivocally, she is going to need them in November. And then to this whole thing, there's Annie Andrews. Now comes the race that could, and probably, barring some barn buster, it could get very interesting. Darline Graham versus Annie Andrews, the sister versus the doctor. Andrews, a Charleston physician, pediatrician to be exact, won the Democratic nomination outright earlier this year and has been preparing for a Senate campaign. She also demonstrated significant fundraising ability, reporting millions of dollars of cash on hand before the Republican runoff. And then here's the political reality of all this. South Carolina is still a very Republican state. No Democrat has won a U.S. Senate race here since 1998. That seems like yesterday, but that's like on the upswing of 30 years ago. So if we're talking strictly about the electoral map, think about that. The electoral map, Darline Graham starts with a rather significant advantage. But that doesn't mean Annie Andrews should be dismissed. Absolutely not. Because Annie Andrews has a very different opponent than she expected. You see, Annie Andrews built her campaign expecting to run against Lindsey Graham. That changed dramatically. Then came the Republican primary. Then came Darline Graham's appointment to the Senate. Then came the Republican runoff. Now Andrews has an entirely different race. She isn't running against a longtime stalwart incumbent senator with decades of Washington experience. She's running against a newly appointed senator who has never previously held elected office and who is now seeking a full 6-year term. Little asterisk, Andrews has also never held publicly elected office. However, that gives Andrews an opening. And you can bet her campaign is going to use it. I would put money on Cauchy on that. The national security question is not going to go away, though. We all heard it. We saw it. If you were watching it, you saw clips of it. That is the one moment from the Graham-Norman debate that Democrats will almost certainly continue talking about it ad nauseum. And if you're going to be honest with yourself, you probably shouldn't blame them. Graham was asked about U.S. national security interests involving Taiwan and the South China Sea. Her response was essentially that national security wasn't her area of expertise. That moment immediately became ammunition for Annie Andrews and the Democrats. Now, let's be fair here. One debate answer does not define somebody's entire ability to serve in the U.S. Senate. But here's the problem. Senators don't get to pick and choose when national security matters. A senator votes on defense spending. A senator votes on military policy. A senator deals with China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, NATO, and, of course, American troops all around the globe. South Carolina has an enormous military footprint. Beaufort County and Charleston County and Sumter County have the incredible luxury of having such a large military presence in our own counties. So you can expect Andrews to hammer this issue. But you see, Annie Andrews has a problem too. And here's, in thinking about it, this is where the race really gets interesting and fascinating, to be quite honest with you. Annie Andrews has to convince South Carolina voters that a Democrat can actually win a Senate seat in this race, in this state, in this decade. That's a huge mountain to climb. South Carolina Republicans have won statewide races for years. Again, Senate seats haven't been won by a Democrat since 1998. And the last Democrat Senate victory here was about 30 years ago. So Andrews cannot simply run an anti-Darline Graham campaign. She has to build a pro-Annie Andrews campaign. That is the same philosophy I have given many candidates locally. Don't focus on your opponent's negatives. Focus more on why you are the best, not they are the worst. So with that, Andrews is going to have to persuade independents. She's going to have to persuade Republicans who don't like Graham. She's going to have to persuade voters who are, quite frankly, exhausted by Washington. And she has to persuade South Carolinians that electing a Democrat to the U.S. Senate won't fundamentally change the direction of the state. Now that alone is a very difficult political proposition. So what should Darline Graham be worried about? As we know, her campaign team and staff she inherited from her brother and whatever campaign consultants, however many they have, they're working on this, just like Annie Andrews' campaign. So what should she be worried about? Well, I'll tell you, and that's not Annie Andrews, at least not yet. Darline Graham's biggest challenge is the Republican Party itself. Start with the Republican Party. Annie Andrews will fall in line at the appropriate time. Guarantee it. Darline Graham needs the Norman voters. She needs conservatives who questioned her experience. She needs Republicans who didn't like the idea of the president becoming heavily involved in the primary. One of my bones about this was just that. And Darline Graham needs the grassroots folks of South Carolina to believe that she, Darline Graham, isn't simply inheriting her brother's seat in the Senate, but that she has earned the right to keep it. That's the real political challenge. Because when you think about Annie Andrews, she's going to have one very simple argument. Give me a reason to vote for me and a reason not to vote for her. Mark my words. Give me a reason to vote for me and a reason not to vote for her. And that's where this election gets really interesting. South Carolina Republicans have spent, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, fighting each other. Actually, more than that. Back when there was 10 candidates trying to take the late Lindsey Graham's seat, nomination, it was like 10 or 11. Millions and millions of dollars were spent. Endorsements were thrown around. Trump versus the grassroots, which, ironically, back in 2020, or 2016 rather, he was considered the grassroots America. Now, things have shifted. It became Trump versus the grassroots. Experience versus the political outsider. Washington versus South Carolina. And now, everybody is supposed to come together. While I agree, that is easier said than done. Because there are some Norman voters. Weren't voting against Darline Graham because they hated her. They were voting for something they believed Ralph Norman represented. She's got to wrap her arms, her head around that axle. And those voters aren't necessarily going to disappear in November. Is that where a libertarian candidate that is on the ballot comes into play? I don't know. The bottom line is this. Darline Graham simply output, she won the Republican primary. She deserves credit for that victory. I give her credit for that victory. She survived a 10-candidate field. She survived a runoff against a sitting congressman. She survived intense criticism over her lack of experience. And she survived a campaign in which her own party was deeply divided. We saw county parties picking sides, which is not only weird and strange and uncanny, that's dangerous. Obviously, our very own here in Beaufort County won't come out and say that, but we saw it. We saw it all over social media when your state executive committee woman is campaigning for one of the Senate candidates. Now she has one job. Unite the Republican Party before Annie Andrews gets the opportunity to divide it again. Because mark my words, Annie Andrews and the DNC and her campaign is going to try every trick in the book to drive a wedge deeper and deeper into the Republican Party. November isn't August. The Republican voters who participated in this primary are not only voters who will decide the Senate race, as I said about libertarians or independents or the Green Party or the whatever. Independents are going to matter, moderates are going to matter, Democrats are going to matter, and Republicans who stayed home will matter. So don't make the mistake of thinking, well, this election is already over. South Carolina, we're ruby red. We're not. But politics has a funny way of surprising people. Here at the Beaufort County House of Cards, we're going to be watching every single twist, every endorsement, every debate, every poll, every twist and turn, and every political mistake that's made. Because the question isn't simply, will Darline Graham beat Annie Andrews? The real question, when thinking about this, is this. Can Darline Graham turn a 5-point Republican primary victory into a statewide mandate in November? That's the real question. And that's the race we're watching now. And believe me, that house of cards isn't finished calling.
You have an incoming transmission.
Traffic tailgate, y'all. You are listening worldwide to DJ Magic Mike on BigPatriotRadio.com.
All right, don't forget, go over here and click on our QR code to buymeacoffee.com. That's who sponsors the show, the supporters. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's awesome to have you. We have a couple of comments. Let's see. Dave Ferguson says, can we do this analysis for Hilton Head Mayor? Well, absolutely. Dave Ferguson, thank you for watching and being a part of the show. Hey, he has been on the show. He is a candidate for the mayor of the town of Hilton Head. Now, just to give everybody an update on that, I have reached out and spoken with current Mayor Alan Perry. He has agreed to come on the show, and we're going to wait till probably end of September-ish to do that. I would love to have not a debate, but a Q&A with these two gentlemen at the same time on this show. Hopefully we can be able to get that together. But to answer your question, Dave, absolutely. I will do what we do and put some analyses together. I wouldn't want to do that right now because there's still a lot of time, and we want to see things happen. But great question. I appreciate that, and I look forward to having you on here again. Debbie's checking in, says Ralph Norman stood for election integrity, and South Carolinians forgot that. Forgot about Trump's election integrity, addressed the nation July 14th, talking all about China's horrific attack on our nation via the election system in 2020, she says. Thank you, Debbie, for tuning in with us and bringing us that, which is true. I think we got one more. Let's see here. Donna checking in, writing in my vote, Mike. Well, there you go. There you go. That's absolutely your prerogative. And there are some places and points and times where I totally get that. I totally do. All right, let's talk about some of the nonpartisan elections coming up in November. And we're going to talk about the school board. Last week, remember, we'll talk about that in a second. Anyway, over in District 3, incumbent Will Smith, he is being challenged by former teacher, community member, business owner, and lawyer Willie Terrell. Smith has not agreed to come onto the show yet. I have asked and asked, not as much as I've asked Carlton Dallas, but I've asked, and I know he's seen it. We can tell that by data today. I know when you open the message, I see it. He hadn't agreed to it yet. Anyway, Willie Terrell has agreed. He has been on here, I think, quite a few times, to be quite honest with you. And we look forward to having him on very soon to tell us about his motivation for school board in District 3, which is St. Helena Island, Ladies Island area. Also in the mix in District 3 is Cynthia Gregory Smalls. She is a former school board member back in 2017. It was then that Gregory beat Will Smith by exactly 3 votes. And she was not without controversy. Now, she was a special election. She ran, she held the seat from like 2017 to 2018, something like that. And then Smith took the seat over in 2018, 2019, somewhere in there. Now, like I said, Gregory Smalls is not without, in her short tenure, some major controversy. Back in that time, school board member Joseph Dunkel called the sheriff's department on Gregory Smalls for making a threat against him during a school board meeting. I believe it was in Hilton Head. Matter of fact, we listened to a 911 call about that earlier. Other races of note, school board chair Carlton Dallas out of District 8, which is the very edge of Bluffton and then the northern side of Hilton Head before you get into the town. He still is claiming that even after his 8th month as chairman, He cannot come on this show because he has not gotten fully situated yet as chair. This is a man who has, he's got world banking experience. He's got plenty of experience. He's sat on national boards, according to his, and commissions, according to his data. Dallas obviously was situated enough in his role as chair to decide to not have any female school board members on committees until last week. Thursday night, right here, 7 days ago, we brought you the story about Carlton Dallas, who became 8 months ago or whatever, school board chair. Instead of having all 6 or 7 committees that are standard practice, he sat 3 of them. There are 11 people on the school board. 0, a big fat 0 of them were females. Someone asked me during the week, well, did the females that are there, did they complain? Yes, they complained. I asked a couple of them. Yes, they made it a point. Well, last week we broke this out there into the public, and did it have anything to do with it? I don't know, but the very next day, and we called Dallas out and Will Smith out on this, as they were the vocal opponents to changing the committees. Anyway, the very next morning during a work session, even with Carlton Dallas and Will Smith putting up a moderate fight, they changed it. They, all of a sudden, now they've added a committee. I believe it was just one, correct me if I'm wrong, and the chair of it is a female, Elizabeth Day. She's chair of and I believe it's the policy, or maybe they changed the verbiage of it. What is their problem, or what was or still is their problem with females, with women being on a committee? Carlton Dallas, in his role, he is up for election. He's being challenged by Kate Nolan. And we're trying to reach out to her to get her on the show. If Carlton Dallas can't come on the show and doesn't feel situated enough as chairman, I don't know. Maybe Kate Nolan will. And if after 8 months, if you're not situated enough in your role, maybe this is too hard of a role. Over in District 5, incumbent Victor Ney is running again and is being challenged by Gwyneth Saunders. Now, you may know that name. Saunders is an almost self-proclaimed, if you look at her data, she is an obvious, very, very far left Democrat. She ran unsuccessfully against Senator Tom Davis for the South Carolina Senate last cycle. Now, no, she's not running as a Democrat because the school board is nonpartisan, which, by the way, I'd like to see the General Assembly change that, because it's important to know your political thoughts when we are electing school board members, especially school board members. That should be partisan. Absolutely should be partisan. Let's see, Elizabeth Hay, incumbent in District 10, has challengers in former school board member Melvin Campbell, whom she handedly beat several years ago, and a political unknown in Gene Myers. There are a couple others, but nothing of great excitement. We'll talk about those as we get closer to the elections. But pay attention to the school board. Very important. We've got people that need to be replaced. We've got people in line that can do a phenomenal job, and we want to see that happen. We want to get them all on here as soon as we can, right here on Beaufort County's House of Cards and BigPatriotRadio.com.
Bringing you the best selection of hits for your listening pleasure.
Yeah, let's get into it.
BigPatriotRadio.com.
All right, let's see. We've got a couple couple other. Jason, thanks for tuning in. I want a candidate that will stand against the flock cameras. I'm assuming you're talking about Senate. I don't know that will make it to the Senate. That's more of a state's issue, state and local, but obviously it could be held up at the General Assembly. I would bring that up to, and we don't have, I don't believe the Senate is, the South Carolina Senate. I don't believe they are on the ballot this year, but all of the House of Representatives in the General Assembly here in South Carolina, they are all on the ballot. We'll be talking to many of them as time goes on, but you've got a valid point. Speaking of upcoming elections, Beaufort County, this is a little plug in here for them. Beaufort County Board of Elections is seeking approximately 300 more poll workers throughout Beaufort County on Election Day, November 3rd. Citizens who complete the training and work on Election Day will receive a stipend and bonus from the county of $235. If you're interested, please contact Tierra Glover with the Department Board of Elections and Voter Registration at tierra.glover@bcgov.net. That is tierra.glover@bcgov.net. You want to make an extra $250 on Election Day. At least you'll be inside and you can watch what's going on. Not enough people out there watching what's going on.
I wouldn't tell anybody about this.
You know, I had put a comment out there a couple times for the show about, let's see, what did it actually say? Let me find my about the Civil War. And was the North really the aggressor? So I did some reading and looked into, if you haven't heard of this fella, wanted to hear what Alexander Stephens, he was the first and only vice president of the Confederacy, and he had a warning for us back in 1861. Now, Alexander Stephens, he's from Georgia. I think like Widener, Georgia, somewhere up that way. I don't know. Don't remember. He was a strange little fellow, little guy. He wrote, there's a lot of material out there. I have a book that I'm reading now it's a whole band of colloquies from him. He's got some speeches and some writings that are rather appalling. And then he makes points here and there. He was not for secession, but he became the vice president of the Confederacy. Some of it still a little strange. There are some chapters in American history that we think we understand. I think we could all agree on that. Until somebody goes back and actually reads, when you read like these colloquies or diaries or speeches, when you go back and read them, what the people who lived through them said, not interpreted by someone 200 years later. It's interesting, and tonight I want to take you back to 1861. Not to rewrite history, not to defend slavery, not to glorify the Confederacy, but to ask a question that Americans are increasingly willing to ask again. Who actually started the war? And what did people at the time believe was happening? I mean, you've got sets of people all over the United States right now. The South did it because it was slavery. They wanted slavery. Nope, the South did it because they were getting screwed by industrial northern U.S. The taxes. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. All kinds of rhetoric, some with good basis points, some tinfoil hat stuff. One of the most fascinating voices from that period was, in my opinion, the strange little fellow, Alexander Hamilton Stephens. He was not an obscure footnote in history. He actually was a former United States congressman. He knew Abraham Lincoln personally. Georgia seceded from the Union, and when that happened, he became vice president of the Confederate States. Now, on March 21st, 1861, right down the street over here in Savannah, Georgia, Stevens delivered what became known as the Cornerstone Speech. And here's where history gets a little complicated. And some are going to say, well, that's not what I was taught in school, and that's okay. Because now we're not going to take it from a book that was made in the 20th century. We're going to go back to the writings of the 19th century. And here's where it gets complicated, because Stevens did not simply say the South wants a war. Quite the opposite. He talked about peace. He talked about negotiation. He talked about separation without bloodshed. He wasn't for secession. But if you're going to do it, let's do it amicably and peacefully. He warned that if the federal government attempted to coerce the seceded states back into the Union, that coercion could in turn become a political dispute, and that end up in war. Stevens looked at this situation and essentially asked the following. He said, if states believe they have withdrawn from a political compact and the federal government responds with military force to prevent them from leaving, who is the aggressor? Think about that. If a state or a group of states decide we're going to withdraw from this political compact, and the compact is the United States in this story, but the federal government comes in with military response and says, we are going to force you to stay. We are going to prevent you from leaving. Then who is the aggressor? Maybe this is where in the South, Southerners have a funny way of saying, oh, that was the war of Northern aggression. I never really thought twice about it. Maybe this is why. That's a question that doesn't disappear simply because we don't like the man asking it. And some of his speeches and material I do not agree with, but it doesn't disappear. Now, we have to be intellectually honest here. Stevens was not some champion of the modernic liberty. His defense of slavery and racial hierarchy was abhorrent. In today's time, we believe it was abhorrent. Then, it obviously was a thing. And before, I say, his defense of slavery and racial hierarchy, it is an abhorrent stance. In that same very speech, the Cornerstone Speech, look it up, read it, you'll be a little shocked. He explicitly identified slavery as the immediate cause of the rupture and described the Confederacy's racial ideology as fundamental to its new government. Now, pause. Many folks have said over time that the issue of slavery was not the core issue. And I have years ago, I have made comment about that. If you read the Cornerstone Speech and the writings of Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederate States, you'll see that slavery and racial hierarchy that ideology was fundamental to this new government, the Confederate States of America. So I don't want to sanitize Alexander Stephens. He's no hero by any stretch, but I don't want to erase what he actually argued either. Because history isn't supposed to be, a collection of heroes and villains. It's not the good and the bad, the cops and the robbers, the cowboys and the Indians. History should teach us and is supposed to teach us how people fought. That is why it is okay and perfectly normal to say on the subject of slavery and racial hierarchy, in the 1800s and the 1700s and before that, actually back to the days of Jesus, slavery was an acceptable position. or an acceptable process. The most slave owners in the history of the world have been from Africa, sub-Sahara Africa. Only in the 1700s, 1800s is when the Caucasian Europeans became involved. It's okay to say that that is how it was then, because that's historical. It's not okay now. Yes, we've changed. It's definitely not okay. The racial hierarchy is not okay. It was then. So anyway, Stevens believed that the federal government's decision to use force against the seceded states would fundamentally change the character of the conflict. He warned that. He said he believed there was still a peaceful path. And then came Fort Sumter. April 12th, 1861. March 21st, he gave the cornerstone speech. Less than a month later, on April 12th, Confederate forces fired on the federal fort in the Charleston Harbor. The attack is conventionally and historically recognized as the opening salvo of the Civil War. So here's where the argument, however, becomes uncomfortable. You can believe the Confederacy was responsible for firing the first shots at Fort Sumter and still examine the larger question of what caused the war. Those aren't necessarily contradictory questions, because wars don't always begin with the bullet. Think about that. Wars don't always begin with the bullet. Sometimes the causes of war have been building for decades, for multiple decades, for millennia. Look at present day. How many wars on present day have been going on for millennia? The Arab and Jewish conflicts. That has been going on and will continue to go on for millennia. But here is where the modern debate begins. Today, we're once again arguing about the relationship between the federal government and the states. More so over the last 10 years than ever in my memory have we had the debate of that is states' rights, that is federal rights. I believe in federalism, which says, if you read the Federalist Papers, says that the states have the right to control what goes on inside their borders. An example, education. If you are a typical conservative, you will say that the Federal Department of Education, which was dreamt up by President Carter back in like 1980 or 76 or whatever, a $60 billion boondoggle, is not part of the Constitution. I believe that. It's not a part of the Constitution. That is a right of the states to decide how their citizens are educated. If you live in Georgia and you don't like the way the Georgia General Assembly teaches children, but you think that the South Carolina way of doing it is far better and above, then you need to move your happy ass to South Carolina or whatever. We're arguing about federal mandates now. We're arguing about whether Washington has accumulated too much power. That's a big argument. And in my readings and as an educated person, I can tell you that the founding fathers of this country did not want too much power in a central government because they just left that after that long boat ride. They didn't want that. Jason checking in, most people only believe what they learned in school and never look deeper into history. If only more people would take their blinders off. Absolutely. That's what we're talking about, Jason. Thank you. That's exactly it. This, I remember, it's been 40 some odd years since, I was in school, but I remember some of the things. I can remember the history teacher because I was so enthused with history. I remember him and the way he taught, and some of the things we find out now aren't actually true. But yet I digress. Too much power in Washington. We argue about it almost daily. Almost, you can hear it hourly. We're arguing about whether states should be able to resist federal policies that they believe violate the Constitution. That is your right to, if you need to take suit against the federal government, that is your right. It is our right as citizens to ask our General Assembly in this particular state that we have to protect our rights as South Carolinians. Same applies to you in the Commonwealth of Virginia or the Commonwealth of Kentucky or the state of Florida. You have state General's Assembly or whatever you call them that you can go to protect your state's rights. We're arguing about executive power. We're arguing about federal law enforcement. We're arguing about elections. We're arguing about taxation. We're arguing about the constitutional limitations of the federal government of Washington, D.C. And we're hearing a phrase that would have been completely, absolutely, I totally believe this, completely familiar to the people of 1861. States' rights. That phrase, states' rights, as we talk about it today on this show and other shows, they were talking about it in 1861. Now, I mean, does that mean that America is headed toward another civil war? Absolutely not. That is not what that means. But it does mean that some of the constitutional questions that Americans were fighting about in 1861 haven't completely disappeared. Does history repeat itself? I believe yes. Have they completely disappeared and coming around? I don't know if they all ever went away in totality. And perhaps that's why Alexander Stephens is being talked about again. Because Americans are beginning to they're rediscovering something that has been buried underneath generations of simplified history. There was more than one argument being made in 1861. The North, catch all this now, the North believed the Union was permanent. This Union that we've created, the United States of America, that Union is permanent, they said. They felt. The Southern states claimed that they had a right of secession. The Lincoln administration, federal government, rejected secession and ultimately used military power to preserve their union they created. Those are facts. The Confederacy believed the federal government became too coercive. I don't know if coercive would be the call. This is true. Some states are believing the federal government now, I don't know if I would use the word coercive, maybe too powerful. And underneath of it all was the enormous, morally indefensible institution, if you will, of slavery, which cannot be separated from the story of secession itself. Slavery and racial hierarchy was absolutely a part of the story of secession. Those facts can exist simultaneously. And that is the uncomfortable truth. I don't know a lot of shows today, podcasts, vodcasts, TV, what you name it. Anybody that will put their face on a camera. I don't know too many of them that will actually talk about slavery, talk about racial hierarchy, talk about when it was a common theme and why it isn't now, other than Beaufort County's House of Cards. It's an uncomfortable truth, but it is the truth. I mean, that is in our name on our ads, that we project the truth. Perhaps the lesson for today, for America today, isn't whether Alexander Stephens was right. Perhaps this lesson could be something bigger. We said it last week. We've said it the week before. We've been talking about politicians, the sheriff's department, law enforcement, blah, 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 blah. Power must always be questioned. When those who are in power have their power questioned and avoid the questions, that is power gone too far. They must be removed. Power must always be questioned, not because government is inherently evil, but because concentrated power can become dangerous when citizens stop asking where its authority comes from. Let the country go socialized or communist. You won't be allowed to ask about or inquire about power or authority. No. Not at all. Stevens believed that once government became, or actually, let me rephrase that. Stevens believed that once government moves from persuasion to coercion, that relationship between the citizen, John Q. Public, and the government changes. And now that's an idea worth discussing in 2026. To those in the General Assembly, or if there's anybody in the U.S. Congress listening, that's an idea worth discussing. Once government goes away from persuasion to coercion, the relationship between citizen and government changes. Because here's the question we should be asking ourselves. When Washington tells a state, South Carolina, Virginia, North Carolina, or a county, Beaufort, Greenville, Lexington, Dorchester, a city, Joe's Barbecue, a business, or an individual citizen, you will do this because we said so. When that happens, where does authority come from? What does the Constitution actually permit? And at what point does legitimate federal authority become coercion? Folks, these aren't Confederate questions. These are American questions. And they belong to every generation. So no, I'm not saying we should resurrect the Confederacy. We shouldn't romanticize slavery. We shouldn't romanticize racial hierarchy. We shouldn't pretend the Civil War was simply a disagreement over abstract constitutional theory either. But neither should we be afraid to examine arguments that make us uncomfortable. When you find yourself uncomfortable looking into a situation or a thing or a topic, it's probably pretty friggin' important. Because if we're willing to read only the history that confirms what we already know, we're not studying history, we're studying propaganda. Alexander Hamilton Stevens, the little mealy-looking guy that he was, believed the North could become the aggressor if it chose coercion over peaceful settlement. History ultimately took a different path, but his question remains provocative. When does government defending the Union become government using force against the people? And perhaps that's why arguments that seemed settled, generations and generations ago are beginning to surface again. Here, history's repeating itself. Not because Americans want another civil war. Hell no. But because Americans are once again asking the oldest question in Republican government: who has the right to tell us what to do, and where does that right end? That's the question. And unlike the politician of 1861, we still, in 2026, we still have the opportunity to answer that. And guess what? We don't even have to fire a shot.
You have an incoming transmission.
Drop the tailgate now. You're listening worldwide to DJ Magic Mike on BigPatriotRadio.com.
All right, it is straight up 8 o'clock. We're coming to turn 4. One last thing, if you're in Beaufort County, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock a.m. in the council chambers on Rebo Road in Beaufort, there is a county council workshop. And in that workshop, they're going to discuss revisions to the Beaufort County Employee Handbook, specifically to Section 16. That is the whistleblower policy. There are multiple interesting facts in reading the agenda and the agenda package when it finally came out. And I want to share with you the interesting facts about this. One section of the revised policy that they're going to talk about and I guess vote on, it says that, now what they're, from what I understand, it was Larry McKellen and Joe Passamet's idea to create an Office of Integrity, another bloated government office. In this one section of this revised policy, it says that the Office of Integrity will be staffed with a position reporting directly to the county administrator or deputy county administrator. Yet, hold the brakes. In another section, the revision says, quote, the Office of Integrity is not under the direction, supervision, or control of the county administrator or administrative department, end quote. Later on in that paragraph, the revision says, in talking about its mission, that the purpose, and I'm getting down to the nuts and bolts of this, so is, quote, make findings and recommendations to county council, end quote. That, my friends, is an ethics violation. We've got duplicitous garble jarble in this agenda, in this document. Yes, I know they put all the council members who wanted their little ideas put in there, but you've got one, whoever put it in there, to report recommendations to county council. That, my friends, I believe, is an ethics violation. The county council form of government in South Carolina only, and I mean only, has one employee, and that is the county administrator. That's it. The law says the county administrator is the sole employee of the county council. Even the county council clerk or clerk to council, my colleagues on county council have just not got this through their heads. She or he, but she in this case, is not an employee of county council. He or she in this case, is an employee of Beaufort County. Her or his job is to clerk for the council, but she is not employed by the council because the South Carolina Code of Laws that for some reason local politicians just don't pick the damn book up and read. One employee, county administrator. So watch that. If that makes it into this, instant ethics violation, in my opinion. This should be an interesting meeting. I will say that. Tune into the county channel on YouTube or however you get, you can probably go to the county, Beaufort County sc.gov, I guess, and find it there too. But it's going to be interesting faux show to check it out. All right. We are, we are at the end. We are at the end of, there we go. We're at the end of things here. Wow, what a fast one. That's going to do it for this week. We're going to be back next week on Facebook, YouTube, and simulcasting on BigPatriotRadio.com. Don't forget to go over here to our QR code, click on it, buymeacoffee.com. That's supporting the show, and we greatly appreciate each and every one of you. Matter of fact, those of you that do that, you've got an email coming out from buymeacoffee.com coming up tomorrow morning with some good information. We've got big stories we're working on still with some more from the school board. We'll have more on that and something important if we can get people to even respond. We're going to have some candidates on. We want to start getting some of our school board folks on. We want to have, as Dave Ferguson put on there, we want to have an in-depth analysis, and I promise to you that I will do that, of the folks running for mayor in the town of Hilton Head. We're also going to have some General Assembly members on, and we will see whatever else we can come up with. But anyway, don't forget to like and share the stream, this show on the YouTube and the Facebook and everywhere else. Click on the notifications bell. You know the trick. You know the deal. We appreciate it. All right. Until next week, be safe and watch your six, America.
Push me, and then just satisfaction. Push me, and then
but the voices in my head go. I know I should sleep, but the voices in my head go. I know I should sleep, but the voices in my head go. I know